to the members, I would welcome you to ask questions now and anytime during our hearings to be able to receive as much information as you need. I want to be very transparent on what is being presented to you right now on the Center for the Elimination of Disproportionality and Disparities, because there was great discussion on this measure and floor debate during the last legislative session. Much misinformation was presented about the role, the purpose, and the need for the Center for the Elimination of Disproportionalities and Disparities. I created this division in 2005, furthered it through Senate Bill 501 in 2011, and brought to the floor the need for permanency of the center in this program. The reason being was that in 2005, in the Appropriations Committee, what we were seeing was that African American youth, Hispanic youth, and to a smaller degree Native Americans were being removed from families at a far greater rate than Anglo youth, even when taken into consideration for abuse and neglect in the households, whether there was substance abuse or income levels. With everything being equal, for some reason, African American youth and Hispanic youth and Native Americans were being removed at a far greater rate. Furthermore, African American youth were far less likely to be adopted than any other demographic and would age out of the foster care system. In the Houston area, although African Americans make up less than 15% of the population, African Americans were being removed at 44%. In the Dallas area, where African Americans make up maybe 11%, upwards of 26% of the children who were being removed were African American. Even in Austin, where African Americans make up less than 5%, we were seeing removals higher into the 20s. The reason this was created was so that we could research why. And what we found was that there were some concerns about cultural competency of the employees who were at the agency. And part of the LAR for the $2 million was to ensure that cultural competency would be taking place. The $2 million that was in the appropriations bill that we disagree upon whether or not it made it into the bill. However, with that being said, it's important that this committee understands what this was about, that this was not some left-wing program to try and teach Malcolm X type theories as was being presented in silent conversations, backroom conversations. This was about ensuring that every child, regardless of the color of their skin, is treated equally and fairly within the system and has an opportunity at being reunited either with their parents or finding a forever family in equal denomination to all others. The data that the commissioners spoke about is important because we need to see if there have been improvements. So with that, I would ask you that since this was implemented originally in 2005 and then again placed with the Interagency Council for addressing disproportionality to provide us data, 9 years has passed. We saw some great improvements up until around 2009. But DFPS's data books show the percentage of African Americans who are being removed in 2012, 2013 has gone up. What has occurred? Because we saw great improvements with this program. So what has occurred that we're starting to see those numbers go back up.
Yeah, so let me back up for just a second and second what the chair just said. Our job is to collect that data, make sure that it's sound. When we look at any one group, we want to say not just what is their proportion in that general community, but what is their proportion in terms of the number of complaints that we received through statewide intake, and then whether out of that group they were kids were treated disproportionately based on their ethnicity. And so the statistics could be used different way. Bad information is frequently worse than no information at all, but I don't always stand by that dictum. Sometimes it's better to know a little bit than not know anything at all. Our job is to collect that, and then if we see a problem area, such as in CPS, is to look at programmatic changes from that level. And if you don't mind, Madam Chair, short answer to your question, because I don't want to be seen as invasive, the answer is not enough. Not enough has been done. You've given me a data point that we need to work with, which is that it's still disproportionate as to the African American youth who are removed, and that's a good data point. It's hard for me to say I need more data to deal with that one. So, not enough. We've got to push those things into the level. We've got the programmatic level. We've got to make sure that there is cultural competency, that people understand the environment that they're going into. And you can look at it on an ethnic basis. I frequently talk about the need when we get called into the home of a service member where an allegation of abuse or neglect has occurred. We need caseworkers who understand that mindset, that culture that exists amongst the service members, and they need to be sensitive to that and going in just to understand what they're dealing with. And so we need that cultural competency across the spectrum for all groups. It is no different in this regard from the police forces who have come to understand you need to know what you're getting into. Not just the names of the folks who are present at that address, but what is this family like? What is the culture that exists here? And again, that goes to things like: is there a culture of drug dependency there? Is there a culture of gang membership? Is there lots of individuals who move into a home, adults who are in and out on different days, and you've got lots of folks living in this home that are not related to any of the kids involved and so forth. It is important that our caseworkers get well trained in all of those things. So with that said, I'm going to introduce Sheila Craig, and then I think maybe Lisa Black is going to talk about a little bit of the Judge Will at the programmatic level on the things that we can do as regards CPS. Is that fair enough? As
Sheila, and then I'm going to ask Lisa as well, and I'm going to put you on the spot here for just a bit. Because I want you to talk about cultural competency, cultural sensitivity, slight difference in my definition from what was just explained. So I'm going to give you two ladies an opportunity to explain it, or I'll come back around with it.
Madam Chair, before you go to Ms. Black, I would like just 2 minutes to introduce her.
You can have more than 2 minutes. You can have however much time you would like, because I would assume that both of them are sitting there trying to determine how they're going to respond to my question in front of their bosses.
And Ms. Black, she became Assistant Commissioner in February 1st, and this is her first time to testify before any committee. So I want to introduce her
My briefly. Staff did indicate that to me, and I want you to know that I will help you today.
Sheila's.
Hello, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. I am Sheila Craig, and I'm the Associate Commissioner in the Center for Elimination of Disproportionality and Disparities, and I'm glad to be here today. To answer your question specifically, you asked a question about what is cultural competency, and I didn't get the last word, cultural sensitivity. In the center, we like to talk about cultural proficiency, and so I will reference it in terms of that term, because what we've learned is that someone can be competent in something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're implementing it, that it's has become a part of the way they work. And so for us, cultural competency or proficiency or sensitivity has to do with not just an understanding of different cultures and how people function and operate, but it's deeper than that. It's an understanding of race, ethnicity, and it also is an understanding of how we impact people within our systems based on race. So when Dr. Janek spoke of looking at the data and examining that data in every system by race, ethnicity, then asking the questions as to why, what is really going on within our system that might be contributing to the unintended consequences of what we're seeing and how that data is playing out and how it's impacting the people we're serving within our system. So to be proficient in understanding culture, it has to do with the understanding of race, ethnicity, and our roles within the system based on our data, and how we are implementing our programs and services and policies and practices, and how that implementation could have unintended consequences or not that might be contributing to the disproportionality and disparities that we see. And so for us, it is not just about an understanding. It is also about how that understanding is transferred to practice.
Assumptions? Can you address assumptions?
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Cultural competency as envisioned and the training when I wrote the law was to ensure that we would not have staff to make assumptions in their application. So tell me about the assumptions.
I can speak to assumptions in the broad sense. What I can say is that as we looked at data in child welfare, for example, and we looked at that data on a case-by-case basis, what we saw was that even when the risk levels of re-abuse were lower for African American families, children were still being removed. And so that we, in having conversations with our researcher, with staff, what we saw was that some staff were making those decisions because they didn't see services in the community. And so they, in their minds, erred on the side of caution. But that's not a reason to remove a child and impact a family's life for generations to come. Assumptions about certain cultures and the idea that families might be at higher risk because of race or ethnicity is also not a reason. So that could be another area of assumption, that we assume based on a person's race or ethnicity, or based on their culture or background, or based on poverty or where a person lives, that that person might not be able to implement the protective measures that are necessary to keep a child safe is another form of assumption. But that's not a reason to remove a child. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's what I would say.
That's much better. In getting towards, sometimes I use the example of, and I don't know how many people in this room will know who I'm even talking about, was that if I was on an elevator late at night and Snoop Dogg walked on. Pardon?
Yeah.
Snoop Lion, okay. Snoop. Well, I stand corrected. People in this room do know who I'm talking about. How comfortable would I be? I was, Mother's Day weekend, I was in Atlantic City, and a gentleman walked up to me outside of a concert venue as my sister and I were purchasing a drink, and I felt sort of uncomfortable and pulled away just a little bit because of the flamboyancy of his suit, and he had a gold tooth, and he was an African American gentleman, and I just tried to look strong but moved just a little bit. Well, I didn't realize until a week later when I got home that the person was actually this multi-billionaire that I wish that I had spoken to. We make assumptions. We all do. And so the cultural competency is about looking within to determine how we make those assumptions and whether it could have a negative impact. And, certainly, for me, former senator, having not spoken to that billionaire could probably have a negative impact on me in some ways. So, assumptions, that's what I wanted to know about.
That's a really great example.